and Madhu Trehan, who will be in conversation with Rohit Gandhi. This session is sponsored by Rajasthan Patrika series.
Should we go on?
Yep.
Are we all audible?
Hi guys, welcome to the session Trial by Media. I know it's one of those harshly debated topics. People constantly will gun at the media will gun at stories, and it's never easy for either people on this side of the fence who will go out and cover these stories, who will go out and start talking about what the issues are and how they need to be covered. And sometimes in the run and gun mode, there are lots of calls that have to be made. Those calls are hard, they're not easy. But on the other end, the viewer or the reader, when they look at the issue, they say, you can't just be doing this. There has to be more protocol to this. Or when judges look at it, or a government looks at it. So these are all challenges that one has to deal with constantly. Now, the panelists I have with me are, all phenomenal journalists. They've had very long-standing careers. Avirook, let me start with him. The only one of the three people speaking. So man needs to be given a bit of support, I think. He's done a beautiful book on his travels through the United States, where he talked about the diversity and the issues in the United States. But again, his more talked about book is about Arushi, again a very harshly debated case, and a lot of people on different sides of that fence on whether the family was involved, whether the family was not involved, the courts in itself, the police, and all of that. So I think it intrigued a lot of people. Again, it was such a strong story to deal with. Madhu Trehan, obviously, she literally brought television journalism to this country in the form she did. News Track, we all grew up seeing News Track. It was such a phenomenal show. Now she does newslaundry.com. It's a very interesting website. Must look at it.
We critique the press, and I have a show on it called Clothesline, which is a satirical show which takes apart everything that you see on mainstream media.
Absolutely.
We make fun of them. Yeah.
And it's not easy to critique the press, because then the press begins to critique you, and that's a lot of them trying to critique you.
They haven't critiqued us.
They will.
They just stopped. Some.
Shoma, again, is running another website, a digital mobile platform called Catch News. But she goes back to the days of Tehalka a few years ago, and then before that to India Today and Outlook. Again, some of her work has been written about. Some of the decisions that she made have been talked about a lot. Let me open the floor. Let me start with Madhu, talking about where are we in the media space. You're critiquing the media about how it does what it does. Is it a fair situation, the way the media handles the story sometimes?
No, I think there are fair and unfair situations. I think it.
Maybe you can just clip it slightly above.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should do.
I think each story is different, but today what has happened, the media has gotten such a bad name with one person who was cornered by the media for something that he said, and in anger he called us prostitutes, and so it's become a slogan. And I think that's really detrimental, because people do forget that it is us prostitutes, I hate the word, but it's journalists who brought stories out. We're the ones who brought out the Radia tapes, we're the ones who bring out the scams. So it's very easy to call journalists' name and say derogatory things about Arnab and feel superior. The fact of the matter is that if it wasn't for these journalists, for most journalists who've done exemplary work, two of whom are sitting here, the public wouldn't know the stories. Yes, mistakes are made. Yes, very often the press jumps the gun. Very often, as say in Arushi's case, where Shoma has done extensive work, and Avirook's book is extremely painstakingly done. In any other country, he would have gotten a Pulitzer. He really has brought out every detail. It's hard work. And this is the thing that what is sad is that journalists who write books, and Anubhav Bhosle, another one who's just written a book, Mother, Where's My Country, on the Northeast. Such painstaking work. But it just goes away.
But the
And
question
that's
is,
the sad thing.
do we overstep? I think the question when they're saying trial by media, we're talking about the idea
Well, in
that do
Arushi's
we...
case, it happened. The media, number one, took plants from the CBI and just ran with all the plants without questioning them, without checking the other side. So a certain image was created on the Arushi case. A lot of muck was thrown on the parents without questioning what kind of plants are we getting. And that led the media and the judiciary, I'm afraid, does get influenced. They do read the papers, they look at television, and I think that that was and is a miscarriage of justice, as Avirook's book shows.
You know, that's one of the challenges when you begin doing stories without, your solid basis. You may think, I have the voice and I have the ability to write, and a lot of people are going to read it, and then you're not able to hold yourself back and say, have I done my due diligence to tell those stories? And that in itself can influence the judges, and that in itself is a pretty sad state to be. That means there ain't a check and balance to say, what can you do, and if you do overstep, then are you responsible for it? And that's why probably trial of media.
I think it's the pressure of time. People are so afraid that the other one will get the story that they just put whatever they get.
Shoma, give me a little sense on a story that you covered and you thought that this was too much on either the victim or on the defendant in itself, because it's very easy to try and not give the defendant even a fair chance sometimes. Liberal judges get smacked for being too liberal sometimes. Give me a sense of some of your coverage.
Sure. Actually, before I speak about case Rohit, I'd like to differ just mildly with Madhu. I agree that in India the media is very robust, and there's a lot of us out there, and some make up for the mistakes of the others, and so by and large there is a kind of media coverage that one way or the other brings issues out into the into the open. But where media trials are concerned, I think that I'd have a much stronger position on it, which is that there is a difference between a trial by media that is based on facts, and there's a difference between trial by media that is based on speculation, and then there is a distinct difference between trial by media and judgment by media. And I think the important thing here is to say that even when a case is going on in the courts, the media does have a job to bring fresh facts into the public domain. But it would be wonderful if it was restricted to bringing out facts, The other thing is that very often, and particularly in the television media, and it may be the nature of the media rather than in the print media, is that the very process of interrogation, the very process of an anchor or a journalist coming to terms, first encounter with facts, that entire process is itself the spectacle, So very often the arc that a journalist is going through in moving from 0 to 100, or very often 0 to -0, is itself the public spectacle, and that is what has ruined a lot of people's lives. Arushi Talwar's parents being the first one. Today if they're in jail, it is because of the Indian media. And I say that not because Avirook and I know these people, it is because after the case was over is when our interrogation of the case began. And I'll just put a few facts out there for you. Some really basic facts, which is not to do with opinion, it's not to do with my understanding of their character. The reason the media pilloried them was because Arushi Talwar's mother, Nupur Talwar, did not cry enough for Indian audiences. But let me put 3 facts out for you. The reason that case went back into the courts, the CBI had filed a CBI closure report. They said that there was no evidence against the parents. It is the parents that went to court to reopen the investigation. And bizarrely, conversely, perversely, the judge decided that they would be the only accused in the trial, and there were 3 other people who were in the spectrum of suspicion. They were kept outside the purview of the trial. So that's the first perversion, and I could list a whole lot more as we go further into the
No,
case.
absolutely.
But I just want to make a couple more points, which is Muslim boys in jail today, innumerable numbers of them. You know, they've spent 14 years in jail, 10 years in jail. 15 minutes after a terror attack, the Indian media declares them the mastermind because they're taking handouts from the police and from the state. There are people who are exonerated 14 years later. They won't even make it to 3 inches of the front page. Their lives are over, their reputation is gone, you know, they've suffered, and the media has no accountability on that. Avirook Sen, a wonderful doctor, 30 years spent in the service of tribals, was declared a Maoist leader. He spent 2.5 years in jail. He no longer is able to enter Chhattisgarh. His wife has cancer. One of the warriors of democracy has been silenced by the media. And when the opposite cases, facts come out, the media hides behind the idea of sub judice. And I think this is a great perversion, because if it is sub judice, you should not be taking police handouts either. Why defendants are never allowed to put their facts out is something that the Indian media does need to introspect about.
You know, and it's
One small thing. I mean, I thought before we started, Shoma and I were talking that, you know, it's going to be a problem because we're not going to be able to disagree, might become boring. But it's great that I have one point to disagree with you on, which is that you said that the media, people are arrested, Muslim boys are put in. Now, the 14 young men who have now just been arrested, I object to the way particular channels have interviewed their families, their wives, giving them a platform to say that they're innocent, while they've just been arrested. We have no idea whether they're innocent or guilty. Nothing has been proven either way, and we are giving one-sided images. The media is giving one-sided images that these are already victims who've been picked up, innocent victims who've been picked up by nothing, with these charming-looking women, wives, children, talking about them. I think that is grossly wrong. It influences people.
The challenge in itself of actually saying, all right, we're going to decide because we have the ability to, in some ways, you know, occupy public space, in itself the problem. As long as that it exists, the idea exists that our job's more to, you know, help you figure out what's happening out there, get you facts that you wouldn't have access to the court documents as a viewer or a reader, to help decipher some of that for you, to help, you know, crystallize some of that material for you. That in itself is one of the challenging positions to be in, and just to utilize your position properly, I think is very, very critical. Avirook, you know, the Arushi's case, again, one of the most debated cases in the last few years.
Right.
Give us a sense of, when you wrote the book through, did you ever feel you were overstepping your boundary? Did you ever think that you were, you know, going into a judge's position in some ways?
Sure, no, the thought actually never crossed my mind. The reason for that is quite simple. In any media or any journalistic narrative, the first thing you're told is there are 2 sides at the very least. What happened in the Arushi case was, for 7 years, there was one dominant narrative. So in one sense, my job was to at least question that dominant narrative. And for me, it's more than that. It's a freedom of speech issue in some ways, and it's about this. All that we're expected to do as journalists or in fact citizens by the Constitution is be reasonable when we talk about free speech. For me as a journalist, I don't look at free speech as as a right or only a right. I look at it as also a privilege. It's upon me then to be responsible when I write. I mean, this is very important. Unfortunately, in the Arushi case, and you were mentioning it, I mean, within 10 days of the murders taking place, not only was there a big press conference which blamed the parents directly, there were television anchors soaking their hands in buckets of blood and reenacting the murder. This is happening in May 2008. They were convicted finally by a court in 2013. Now, my problem is that the media, yes, can play prosecutor and it should play defense. what I disagree with it, where I sort of depart, is when it plays judge, and when it suspends rationality and plays judge. That's one of the problems with this case, is just the suspension of rationality. When you, like, I think both of us, we know, when handouts are given out and unquestioningly, stenographically reported, some of the things that are put out are genuinely absurd. For instance, why would you believe that erections have a life after death? Because some foolish expert says this in court? Why will I not challenge that? Why will I not be able to ask him, wherever he is, show me a journal which, makes this a scientific fact, Why can I not ask the journalists who put out, say, stories about mass orgies, which the Talwars were involved in, with not one shred of evidence? The point of all of this is that the sadness that I feel is that there are no reparations. Journalists, one of the things that we don't do very well is admit our mistakes. I think it's time to start.
Let us take this. Let us take us to a different direction. One of the challenges of crime, covering crime, even though violent crime may have gone down, the coverage of crime has gone up. A big reason a lot of scientists have argued is the very fact that it gets very good numbers, the TRPs as you call it, and violent crime will always attract more attention as against white collar crime. And so the coverage is as much as 30% of crime, because it's a really sexy area, you get eyeballs fast and easy to cover it. The idea of then, beginning to talk a bit about how easy does it become for you to then start a trial, because that is what will keep bringing people back as long as you keep talking about violent crime. Do you get that sense that we cover crime maybe too much? There are many other areas which just get left out.
I don't know, you're speaking in a language I don't exactly get. Let me figure this. I think journalists cover stories as they happen. I think most journalists will go for what touches their humanity, where they often see a miscarriage of justice, which is what happened in this case, and I've done it many times, where it inspires you to do a story when you know that it has been misreported or badly reported or underreported. I think it's the bosses who talk about the TRPs and what gets the eyeballs and all that. So I don't think journalists, at least my generation of journalists, or in my rather maybe arrogant way, that good journalists don't really think in terms of, I'm going to do this because you get eyeballs. I think you hear of a story, it grabs you, you do it. That's my old
just to add something to this,
style
you asked whether crime is overcovered. In the case, in the Arushi case, for instance, I don't even think it's a plain and simple crime story in the first place. Shoma, you and I have covered this for a long time. I have always gotten the sense out of this story that it actually is telling you something much bigger than who may or may not have killed this girl or committed these ghastly crimes. It actually tells us a lot more about our institutions, our media, and about us as a society, as living in this
and
mosaic.
The arrogance of the authorities in power and how they can misuse it.
Yes, I used to call it the tyranny of petty authority, but that was removed from the book.
I'd also like to come into this, Rohit. I don't think the issue is whether you cover crime too much or not. My submission to you would be that the media, in fact, does not cover many issues enough, including crime. The crime stories you pick will be the Sheena Vora case. Even after the Nirbhaya case, there have been innumerable really violent rapes. There are crimes against Dalits created by the state. There are innumerable crimes against tribals, again perpetrated by the state and the police. those are not sexy stories. The media doesn't pick it up. So it's not a question of whether you are covering a particular genre of stories too much or not. It is the irresponsibility with which you're doing it. That's one thing. The other is that the kind of hysteria that media generates is having an impact on the judicial process. In the Nirbhaya case, Justice Kurian was speaking to the law college, and he said that the judge that was looking at the Nirbhaya case actually said, and he may or may not have come to that conclusion independently, but he said that if he had not given the kind of punishment that he did, then the public would have hung him, and he used that exact phrase. Justice Lodha has actually asked for some degree of, some parameters of convention to be built up on how the media will conduct itself. And I, more than even Avirook, I am a freedom absolutist. I do believe that we should not put any restrictions on the media, except for those that are self-created by the fraternity. But the fraternity is not willing to even accept that we are overstepping the line. And we are. I will give you so many examples, Rohit. For instance, in the Avirook Sen case, there's a simple fact that was never brought into the public domain, which is that when Binayak began to be accused of being a Maoist leader, he was in Kolkata. He came back to Chhattisgarh, the place that he had spent 30 years working for the tribals, and he went to the police station himself to say that there seems to be a misunderstanding. And the police arrested him when he had voluntarily gone to the police station. Is that known by the public? No, it's not known. Do you know that the Talwars are accused of murdering their child because she was in bed with the servant? Do you know that the CBI's own report says that there is not a jot of blood, not semen, not hair, not a trace of the man in her bedroom? Their own closure report says that there is no motive for the Talwars to have killed their child. The only reason the Talwars are in jail today is because of a plain and simple elementary piece of maths, which is that there were 4 people in the house, 2 people are dead, so QED, the other 2 must be guilty. And that after they have admitted that there is no trace of any sexual intercourse between the 2 in their room. Arushi's blood was all over the room, Hemraj's wasn't. So you have no weapon, you have no motive, you have no evidence. So this is not an emotional argument that Avirook and I are making. We have both looked, I certainly, and his book is a masterful piece of work, looked at the prosecution's case and based our journalism on that.
But there are lots of stories where,
So here's the thing. I mean, I was speaking a little while about suspension of rationality and how you must sort of bring that into any kind of work that you do if you want to put it out. For instance, one of the 26 reasons that the judge offers which point to the guilt of the Talwars is that nobody on the night of these murders was seen moving around suspiciously in the neighborhood. So let's hear that again. Nobody was seen moving around suspiciously. So the leap from there to you have committed these murders is actually absurd. There was a recent case in Bombay in which people picked up a policeman picked up somebody, and eventually it went for they wanted remand, where the prosecution put to the judge that he was seen drinking tea suspiciously. Now this is a good judge, so he said, well, there are many ways of drinking tea. You can have masala, liquor, cutting, whatever, but I have not yet come across a suspicious way of drinking tea. Dismissed. Unfortunately, because of the kind of pressures, I think, that the media has taken it upon itself or did in the Arushi case, many things cemented themselves in the minds of the public. And where do judges come from? They're not from a different stock or a different planet. They come very much from our own milieu. So, at the Allahabad High Court, when the Talwars go and ask for bail, one of the points that they make is the defense makes is that, look, they have been convicted, but they have no record, and there is no chance of them repeating this crime, so they are not a danger to society. This is a High Court, remember. It's not just a magistrate speaking. The High Court is a place with great majesty, if you. The High Court judge says I don't think this is true because, you know, of course you cannot repeat the crime. You had just one daughter. You have killed her. Now this is in the second tier of the judicial system. There are three. But this is the cementing of the impression of guilt. You know, and it reaches not just, you know, public like us, but people up the line as well.
There are lots
Two
of cases
things,
where, you know,
Sorry, two things I wanted to just continue with what he said, and Shoma. In the case of, you asked, your question was about, is crime covered enough? You know, is not covered in certain areas particularly in the Northeast. There's a young girl called Manorma who was gang raped in as violent, if not worse way than Nirbhaya. She was shot at her genitals to destroy evidence, so that they, after DNA, nobody could, it was all destroyed, so nobody could give take evidence from her body. It was barely covered.
Is it class related?
It was, no, it was barely, it wasn't, it's the insurgency. So it was barely covered in the mainstream media. This was the incident which you might recall, that her mother and aunts and other women went to the police station and they stripped in order to get attention and to get justice for her. And that was the only way that was covered. Otherwise, many such rapes in the Northeast have been completely ignored. And that is a problem. The other thing is that I'd like to bring up the other point, that when you talk about Jessica Lal's case, I don't think Jessica Lal's family would have gotten the justice that they did.
Agreed.
If the media and the people had not taken it up.
And Katara's case.
Yes, but you know, the difference in the Jessica Lal case is that, again, when the media helped reopen that trial, it was based on an empirical piece of evidence, which is that a sting investigation was done, which showed that Shayan Munshi had been lying, you know. And yes, it was done by Tehelka, but it's not something that other media has not done. I come back to the point that media trials, the court of public opinion, is a very powerful instrument, but it must be used with responsibility. It must be used basis empirical evidence. All the investigative stories that I have helmed as an editor, or very courageous reporters, other editors have done, the ones that are efficacious are those that are based on evidence. Today, the one thing I would say about the Talwar story, or the Soni Sori story, or Binayak Sen, or any of the ones, or the Muslim boys that we have stood up for in the past, I would say that I am willing to be cross-examined by the prosecution lawyer, not just by, you know, people who are, because you have to base that on the basis of evidence. And I'd just like to bring up, in this very festival, a couple of years ago, Ashish Nandi, a man of great erudition, a man of committed you know, academics and allegiance to the Dalits, a sociologist, a polymath, sat on a stage and made a small argument. You know, he was testing a fairly creative argument that he wanted to put out in an intellectual public platform like this. The man was completely pilloried, you know, he was torn apart by the media, taking that one statement out of the context of a body of 30 years of work and making him come out as an anti-Dalit, you know. I think that really captures the kind of harm that one can do when you pull things out of context and you make a feast of it. Let's take Sunanda Pushkar. You know, when she died, the media was her defenders. They forgot that 5 years earlier, when there was a cricket scandal, it was the same media that was discussing the sari she wore, the men she was sleeping with, how she was leaving her son out in the you know, streets while she was sleeping her way to power. You know, no one thought about the cost that that had on her character or on her inner life. When she died, Shashi Tharoor was immediately the suspected murderer. There were television channels who ran these Astons saying, where is he hiding? He should come and face us, you know. He's here today speaking at every platform. How do we account for the damage that we do to people while we are still in the process of arriving at facts ourselves?
Yeah, two sides of this now. One is, are our systems not capable of handling, whether it's the executive, whether it's the judiciary, of handling the way things unfold? Do government institutions run things amok? and that's why you need a very strong media. But when you have this very strong media, it continuously tries to push things its way, then are they responsible enough in handling?
Do you actually think we have a very strong media? You believe that?
I think we have a very strong media. I think we have a very vibrant media, if at all.
Vibrant and strong are two different things, I think.
But both, I think, yeah.
But look, I think one of the ways, or one of the things that I think about sometimes is that, yes, we have a vibrant media and all of that, that's fine. But I think we are a media that's overall led by public mood and public sentiment. I think there aren't that many people who go against the grain of that sentiment, because it's sort of self-fulfilling. And I mean, the Arushi case has taught us a lot, I think, about this as well. So it's a kind of wag the dog situation where overall the mood is that they are guilty. The media writes they're guilty because the investigators then plant stuff. The judge senses that, well, the media is writing they're guilty and the public mood is they're guilty, so let's pronounce them guilty. And then it goes back to the media then slapping their own backs and saying, we were right all along. I was asked a question on a show that lots of you watch, something about the nation wanting to know about whether after the Talwars were convicted, the media stands vindicated. I mean, let's grasp the simple fact. This is a 3-tier judicial system. The reason why there are 3 tiers is for the correction of mistakes. So the vindication or whatever, your approval that you get from one court may be overturned by the next. This is a simple fact. That we don't grasp it as media people is saddening for me at times. Why should I, for instance, believe that pornography can be, you can access pornography on a file size of 3 KB. I mean, somebody would make millions of dollars if that was possible. That's how, for instance, the Talwars were accused of watching porn. No journalist asked, isn't the file size a little too small? No journalist asked a question, for instance, that whiskey doesn't wash away DNA, or that it is impossible to clean one blood group from another, separate and clean just one part. If there's an AB positive and an O negative, I can't clean a room leaving just one behind. It's impossible. It's non-science. But to accept this narrative, to accept it without question, that is the problem. And if we apply it not just to this case, but to others, I think we'll have to go back to your point, a stronger media. That's what I mean by strong.
What is your sense, Madhu, on do you think Indian media today is weak in any way?
No, it's not. It's not weak. It's either it's manipulated very often. There is access journalism where people who don't do favorable stories to a particular party will never get interviews, will never get information. There is that part of it. There is, of course, a large section of institutionalized paid news. So none of it is weak. In fact, vibrant in some areas in rather wrong ways. But there's still good journalism happening. The point here is that there is also a lot of self-censorship, because as we saw during the Congress time, Robert Vadra's story was sitting on, I think, every editor's desk for 8 months, right, and nobody ran it. In fact, the woman who actually broke the story first, her newspaper refused to run it. Why? Because of fear of vindictiveness, fear of reprisals, which happens all the time with raids and instruments of democracy leaving no footprints behind, and it's done to anyone who just kind of, yeah.
Telka was shut down for 3 years, right?
Yeah, so it's that kind of thing that kept Vadra's story in. Finally, in desperation, it was given to Arvind Kejriwal, who then told the story to the media, and the media shot over his shoulder. So there is this kind of self-censorship that goes on. What happened, I mean, look at Snoopgate. 3 weeks before it became clear that Narendra Modi was going to win the election, the papers were full of Snoopgate. It was covered by every news channel, every newspaper, every magazine. As soon as it started becoming clear that he's going to come into power, Snoopgate died. Where did the story go? It just disappeared. So there's a level of self-censorship which is very dangerous, and is dangerous because we all have faced and do face in future vindictiveness and reprisals from any government that has been in power so far. In fact, the only government that I've not had reprisals from, strangely enough, was VP Singh. Although he blamed my organization for his resignation for exposing the Mandal riots, he did not take any revenge. But every other government that has been in power has in some form either tried to censor or to stop or to manipulate, but this is one of the biggest issues, that it may be a vibrant media, but the problem is that you have to decide every single day as a journalist that am I going to risk my life, my family's life, my children who are working somewhere who will be also raided? Do I need to do for one story which will be exposed today and then tomorrow it's garbage?
You know, the challenge, I think, is when you actually go file a piece, and then your organization gets raided or they start coming after you. But the other side is that there are too many people out there in the media who are on different sides.
No, excuse me, they don't always go after the journalists, all right? Because journalists, because we make a lot of noise. धरना हो जाते हैं press club में. They usually do it with a twisted knife on the owners and the sponsors, which happened in Telka magazine, where Shankar Sharma was thrown into jail for 9 weeks. So there is harassment, but it's done in a rather clever way. And so I think that they know that if they go after the owners will say, please stop this. It happened in Outlook, it's happened to so many organizations, that the owners and the proprietors will say, please just apologize or get out of, don't cover this anymore because we're being harassed.
And they also come after you if they also realize that you are actually being played by one side or the other. Sometimes that happens as well, and that's one of the challenges sometimes, is if journalists themselves stand on one side or the other, covering a political party and then filing for that political party.
Rohit, my point here would be that it's not so much about, you don't want a homogeneous media, you know. I don't think that my problem with the media, or indeed nobody's problem with the media, should be that there are many versions to a story or that there are many positions on a story. I think the problem is when you outlaw any other perspective on a story. And that again has happened repeatedly when, for instance, I'll go back to the time of when there was a lot of the Salwa Juram happening and the Maoist issue was really top of the public consciousness because of Manmohan Singh saying that it is the biggest internal security threat. There were some journalists who were really trekking it out on the in the tribal heartlands, trying to bring forth the fact that this was really a symptom of great tribal unrest and that the Maoist ideology was merely a veneer to what is really a tribal crisis. And repeatedly the national media presented activists, credible activists, as well as journalists as pro-Maoists. Or whenever you take a position that is not part of the dominant narrative, you're deemed an anti-national, you know. And I think that that labeling of anyone's positions is a deeply pernicious activity. That's one thing. The other, I think, is that I would put some of the monkey back on the audience, which is that as viewers, we are the other end of the continuum of what constitutes the media. And the media today is as corrupt or as effete or whatever it might be because the audience and the readers are part of it. Readers don't want to pay for media. It is the only business in the world where you don't pay for that which you consume. You prohibit good journalists from doing the work that they want to do because you leave them at the mercy of corporates and advertisement. When, as viewers, you watch the shows that are salacious and sensationalist and they get the highest TRPs, you are very much part of that continuum that is creating bad media. You know?
Totally. I just add a line to that, and I'm glad you brought up Ashish Nandi. So, you know, one of the best living academics in this country, great sociologist. But I don't think, you know, he falls far short of somebody who I consider the person who understands Middle India best sociologically. That person's name is Ekta Kapoor. And
Is who?
Ekta Kapoor. Yeah. She's a genius, and I'm not. Now, and what happened with Ekta Kapoor coming, becoming such a big part of our lives is there was an osmosis from entertainment to news, and the dramatization of what we see in a lot of news, which has crept into a lot of news, I think owes in part to the success of the fantastic family dramas of Ms. Kapoor. Now, this is not a frivolous point. I don't mean to, I don't mean to make a joke out of this, but the fact is it taps into something quite deep in Indian middle class society as a whole, I believe. And that is our innate conservatism. I think for us, people who don't conform or they appear not to conform are very easily placed as the other, and that's what happens to people like Avirook Sen or the Talwars. Their contexts are different, but they all seem to be that kind of person who you don't want in your neighborhood for one reason or the other.
You know, we have 15 minutes left. I'm going to open it to the audience. Sir?
Yes. What Shoma has said is correct. Avirook Sen case is a genuine case. I know Avirook Sen. I was also a Naxalite, but I am a professor of economics, so I left it in 1975. But there are other facts. Journalists have very low character. I will give you the example of this.
Have low what?
Yes, sure, character.
Kya hai?
You see, there was a seminar here on Ramcharitmanas. Ashok Vajpayee attended it, Trivedi attended it, and one Philip, who is translating Ramcharitmanas into English by a grant by Rohan Murthy, son of Nayan Murthy, who is also an ex-communist, let me tell you. So, there was a discussion. Before the seminar started, I told Ashok Vajpayee that Tulsi Das was boycotted by upper caste and he spent his last 20 years in a mosque. And the mosque arrangement was made by Abdul Rahim Khan Khanan, the son of Behram Khan, the guardian of Akbar. One thing.
So can you ask a question?
what is your question?
No. I will make the statement only. So listen.
No, sir, we want you to ask a question.
You are saying, but journalists don't have the character. Now this
That's a
has
statement,
come in
sir.
paper. It is totally wrong.
And that's a question.
Sir,
The question is, let me
Read
just
another
help you.
paper. Just read another paper.
So I would just respond to that with one thing, with one response, which is that you began, because we're talking about trial by media, I'm not getting into character. Okay, sir. I think that would
What
be
did he do that made him such a poor character in your view?
no, sir, just
What?
Rob, that's your...
Robert
Okay,
Wagner
sir.
did not commit any mistake.
sir, I would just
Okay, no, Shoma.
Okay, so
think
you
we'll
have your views. You have your views, and you mean that any journalist who writes anything that you disagree with
Sir,
is of
sir.
bad character.
The ones- Can I
question
say
is-
before...
so let's have this
But one sec,
discussion after.
Shoma,
Yeah.
Shoma, let me take this. Sir, the media has report... Okay. All right. Okay, let's move on to the next question, sir. Thank you.
Somaji made a very candid statement that we don't pay for the newspapers what we read. In fact, a newspaper costs only just 2 rupees or 3 rupees. I think the material that you have is worth, I think, thousands rupees worth. And as a result, what happens in the rural India or India, that people, journalists blackmail people. Number one. And I think, my question is, I think you should be paid very well. You are not paid well. Neither journalists are paid well, nor your singers are paid. So they blackmail. I think this is my question. I think you should be paid well. That's my question. Should you not be paid well?
I think we're paid well. I want to make that point. I think we're paid
at lower
very
level they
well.
are paid
No,
just 2,000 rupees.
I would make, sir,
Not
just,
paid well.
sir, just
You
a
ask,
minute.
the people who
I
are
would
working
make
in the
one
field.
distinction. I would make one distinction that English-speaking journalists are paid well. Journalists in Mufassal India, hinterland India are not paid well, and that there is a big distinction between that.
It
there's
is
just
a very big, it's a very big challenging area.
Also, I think you're making a kind of gross generalization, if I may. You're suggesting that anybody who is not paid properly, therefore turns characterless or criminal. This is not true. The rickshawala is not paid well, but doesn't mean that he's doing something wrong. This is something intuitive, sir. It has to come from the journalist doing his job, taking pride. It's not just about the money.
And also, please, let me clarify that when you talk about journalists taking money or paid news, it is not a journalist doing it alone. These are packaged, they're institutionalized, and it is done in organizations with the not only the instigation coming from the top, from the owners, where packages are made and sold, that you will be given so much of during election, that you will get so much of positive news, you'll get so many headlines, so many inches, and if you pay more, we'll also give negative news about your opponent. So it's got nothing, it's not just one journalist or 20 journalists, there are certain organizations that have institutionalized it, and to simplify to the point that journalists are bad character, or if they were paid more they wouldn't do it, it's not quite as simple as that.
The lady.
Hello, the panel mentioned about self-censorship. I wanted to know if, say, you mentioned about rape cases worse than Nirbhaya, which is not being covered. Now, television news channels are viewed by a mixed audience. Don't you think it would be, leave an adverse impact on kids who are watching, say, rape being covered? So, what do you think about censorship of news? We have censorship of films and everything. What about censorship of news?
You know, as a mother, I'll tell you, as a mother, I was very upset when CNN was covering Bill Clinton's shenanigans with Monica Lewinsky, because my 8-year-old got to know what oral sex was, and I really was not in favor of her knowing it at that time. I think there are certain things at a certain age that a kid must learn at whatever time. So yes, but I'm totally against censorship. I think it was my responsibility to manage that as a mother. I don't think censoring works. It never works, because in one way or the other, if you suppress it in one way, it'll come out in another. And it is for us as responsible parents or responsible friends who you know of younger people, you advise each other and say this should not be shown. But I think just banning things. Tell me a book that has been banned that is not available in the market today. Tell me a film that India's Daughter was banned. We all saw it on YouTube. So what is the point? Why pretend? And it comes from an attitude. Censoring comes from an attitude of extreme colonial arrogance, that I can see it, I can watch it, but I won't go and rape someone, I won't go and kill someone because I'm educated and therefore superior. But the masses, you never know what they'll do. Who are the politicians to decide what we can see and watch and read and write? They're politicians. They're not gurus out there giving. Who gave them this status to give them gyan, to give us gyan?
Shoma, go ahead, respond.
Yeah, I also think that there's a big issue about tonality. You know, one, absolutely, you know, as I said, I'm a freedom absolutist. Information is ubiquitous. I don't think anybody should be making decisions about what you should see and not see. But there is a responsibility about speaking on public platforms. There was a time, you know, the social media has had very positive impacts. It is an egalitarian platform. But in the past, you did have to train yourself for the right to speak publicly. And I think that process of training yourself or of equipping yourself to speak publicly has been lost. And there is no accountability now for speaking publicly. I think the conventions for that will develop as we feel the impacts and the negative impacts of this more and more, but I would prefer those conventions come from within rather than from outside.
Out back, the right. Yeah, go for it.
So I'm Sachin, and the question I wanted to ask is, we have been focusing mostly on individual case studies when we talk about trial by media. In the last couple of years, the state also has been having a narrative, the narrative of anti-national. And what has happened is, it is very sad, because you expect the media to be countering that narrative, but the media starts branding a lot of organizations which came through an IB report saying that this organization is anti-national, doing all kind of wrong activities, and the reputation damage that is caused to organization which has been doing amazing work is huge. and the organizations won't have the resources to repair the damage. And where does the accountability lie then? You know, I mean, do we see that in the next few years the media will at least reflect on themselves and say that they're doing something really wrong and they need to come up with strong policies?
Are you talking about Greenpeace?
Yeah, that's one organization.
I'd actually like to make an intervention on that, that you're right, there are many activists that have been deemed outlaws. You know, even Arundhati Roy has been declared an anti-national just because she has a radical position that doesn't sit with, you know, a mainstream view. I think that the media definitely needs to develop conventions. First thing that I would suggest to ourselves as a fraternity is that you carry a headline or a television headline in a certain intensity, at a certain time, with a certain frequency. When you're proved wrong, at the very least, your admission of being wrong should be played with the equal frequency, with the equal intensity, and with the equal visibility with which you destroyed somebody's reputation. I, again, as a journalist, do not believe that you should not have recourse to defamation cases. We are part of the society, we are part of the citizenry, and I think we owe it to be accountable for what we say. Defamation cases should exist, but even in defamatory cases, the verdict comes 10 years later, 15 years later. Do you have the financial wherewithal to take someone to court? I think that the reparation has to come immediately, and as I said, with the same visibility with which the accusation was made.
You know, just coming back to you on this, one of the challenges is the amount of jingoism you expect out of your media and the flag waving. The more liberal the media would be, the more the ability of the media to then go out and tell these stories. You expect to one channel be the most watched channels because it's the most jingoistic. You're not going to get the liberal view out, and that in itself is a big, huge challenge. Okay, the lady on the far left there. Yep.
Hello, sir. I am an aspiring journalist, and when I interned with a few media houses, I did realize that even if a reporter comes up with a good story, sometimes it gets stuck with the editors because it is politically incorrect or it is politically unsafe for the media house itself. So what does a reporter who has just started working and who earns like 20 or 25K, what does he do, and how should he make his way through the labyrinth till the editor's desk?
Yeah?
Short answer to that, if you
Go for it. Go for it.
Firstly, your inner media house. I mean, every media house has what's called a playing field, and as a professional journalist, you realize at some stage, because there's no point saying that I will be allowed to write everything I want to write. There are very, very exceptional media houses that will allow you something like that. So you know the playing field already. Within that playing field, the best you can do. That really is all that's expected. I mean,
Avirook, I would have a different point of view
I
on
know
this,
I know you would.
which really is about the role of the editor. And I think I've always held this premise, and I hold it still, which is that there are 12 or 15 really powerful editors in this country. If you live by the profile of being an editor, you can change the rules of the game. I think that as editors, the reason you're called an editor is because you are supposed to, yes, within certain financial constraints, set the frame of what you are willing to do or not to do. And as an editor, I think that it is self-defeating to constantly be looking at what audience taste is, because you're also supposed to be setting the agenda, you're supposed to be setting audience taste, not merely reflecting audience taste, because then you don't need to be an editor. You might as well have managers as the heads of publications. So I would say that it's not the responsibility of a journalist, it is the responsibility of the editor to push the boundaries of what the playing field can be within certain constraints created by the refusal of audiences to pay for the news.
You know, just putting a spin on this, we are in the setup process of a new global media news network. One of the first things we set in place is legal systems in place. One of the things, I was talking to Shoma earlier, and she was mentioning how the legal framework was missing out of a lot of news organizations. But having that in place then helps you tell that story more efficiently because you have the paperwork to tell that story. Last question, this gentleman up ahead.
Also, what is missing is, besides the legal, the ethical framework. Because I find very often young journalists starting out don't know the basics of ethics in journalism, which is like no freebies. When it's off the record, it's really off the record. I was giving a lecture once when a channel was being launched, and they'd asked me, what do you want to talk about? I said, ethics of journalism. When I brought up all these subjects, they were shocked that they were not supposed to take freebies or take a free plane ride to cover a particular story. I think these are things that every channel has to put in place.
Sir,